Hello everyone, in this video we're going to be continuing our series on the Mooney 20, and we're going to be taking a look at descent and normal landing. We're going to try to avoid doing anything weird here. We might need to do a little bit of playing kind of in and out. I call it movie magic in order to get some of the numbers perfect, but it shouldn't be too much. So let's go ahead and get started. So first of all, we're sitting here. We are about 7 miles to the west of Wyndham Airport. The winds today are predominantly out of the west, which makes our life very simple. It just means we get a little left downwind for runway 27. So the reason I'm paused here and I'm not rolling is because this aircraft is a little tricky on the descent. One of the things they're going to ask you to do is to descend and keep the engine within a couple different parameters. The first parameter is we have to stay warmer than 300 degrees Fahrenheit. And the second thing is we can't go into our yellow nasty range here. So it's just something you want to be kind of mindful of. So what we're going to do here is we're also going to make sure our cowl flaps are closed because of this cruise. So I'm going to go ahead and unpause. And I'm going to start reducing power here. Now, the book specifically states you're not supposed to be going less than 15 manifold pressure. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to close up. I'm going to assume the air is a little dusty here, so I'm going to go ahead and close that up. Now, unfortunately, this instrument here inside the flight simulator does not necessarily mechanically agree with the actual pressure. I actually have an external gauge for this, and we're about 3 short just because of the way that works. So that's all set. I'm going to go ahead and disengage the autopilot. And we're just going to let the nose start making its way down here at about 500 feet per minute. During the descents, the one that the club purchased actually has the ability to do speed brakes, and the speed brakes are fantastic. You just reach over, you press a little button, it starts getting a little buffety, and next thing you know, the plane starts slowing down. So right now, we're coming down, we're about 15 inches of mercury, and we're about 2,400 RPM. We could increase our RPM a little bit to help us with our descent, but one thing you're noticing is that airspeed is just creeping up, and it's creeping up, and it's creeping up. Our temperature right now is about 360 on the cylinders, so we're doing fine so far. Now, if you wanted to do an old school Cessna 172N where you pull the throttle back, pull the carburetor heat, and just go, you could, but that's, like I said, you're probably going to get in that no zone as far as RPM goes, or you're just going to shock cool the engine, just something you want to kind of be mindful of. So right off our 12 o'clock there is a lovely Wyndham. Like I said, we're going to be popping into runway 27 there, so it's going to be a pretty standard approach, and we'll take a look at the pattern itself once we get a little closer. Again, I'm doing about 1,000 feet per minute, still at 15 inches of mercury without too much difficulty. I could put the propeller handle forward a little bit to help us out a little here. And again, like the real one, we actually have the ability to pop out the speed brakes, which will help us slow down a lot. So here's where the problem is going to begin. Like I said, I'm going to level off at 1,300 feet, which is going to be our traffic pattern altitude. And this is where things get interesting. Notice that the aircraft does not slow down. That was a pretty basic descent here, but we can't take advantage of that, speed squared here. So it's going to take a very long time for this thing to slow down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pull the throttle back some more, keep us out of the no zone. Take a look over on the right. Looks like we're doing about, like I said, 1950. We're going to get a little warning if we pull the throttle back too far. We'll deal with that in a minute. So we're at about 2,000 RPM, and you can see this aircraft does not want to slow down. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pull a little bit of a sideways teardrop kind of a thing for 2.7 here, just to suck a little bit of the energy out of this plane. There we go. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Excellent. So now we're in much better shape. Swinging back around, we're going to line up for that nice little downwind for 2.7. About 1,300 feet there, and now we're at a great speed. Okay, so this aircraft is pretty handy because it has retractable landing gear, so we're actually going to use those landing gear to help slow us down here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put them down. As long as you're less than 133 knots, you're allowed to put the landing gear down. As soon as you do that, you'll notice the whole plane pitched forward very aggressively, and I almost lost 100 feet because of it. It's going to do that on account of the fact that it creates all that extra drag that you're probably not used to. Swing back this way. And now we're lined up for a nice little downwind, a little on the low side. Like I said, that's actually going to be on our favor here because we're awfully close to the runway. Looks good. All right, we're about to beam the numbers now. Nice. All right, we're going to start slowing down. We'll go ahead and bring down the flaps. And we're going to go ahead and start taking a look at all of our options here. So we're going to make sure we do our gumfuls here, gas undercarriage, make sure propeller flaps, light speed. We're going to make sure our RPM is high. We're going to make sure everything else is all set as far as throttle power goes. And one thing you're going to notice when you drop those flaps is you need a tremendous amount of trim in order to keep this aircraft on nice and soft here and nice and controllable. The other thing you're going to want to keep an eye out for is as we're coming around, we're going to make sure our fuel pump is on in case we have any issues. And like I said, you want to check to make sure those landing gear are down. Now, there's a visual indicator on the floor. That's a little green box that you see, and you want to confirm that that's all set. The final approach speed we're going to be using with this particular aircraft is going to be right around 71 knots. Like I said, one problem with the simulators, you just can't see nearly as well as you see in the real world. And I can tell you right now, we're a little high and we're a little on the fast side. That looks pretty good. I'm just going to square this off in a second into our final. Flaps are down. Ooh, the controls get a little slow with this plane when you start getting slow. Now, one of the things that makes this tricky, at least from what I've discovered in the simulator, and we have to go around. I'm going to go ahead and pause right here. So you're probably saying, wait, what? I thought we were landing the plane. Well, we're in a go-around situation on account of the fact that if you take a look at my speed, I'm doing about 75 knots, but I'm also taking a look at the end of the runway, and I can see based on this, which isn't there in the real world, of course, that we're too high. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to intentionally land the plane, and then what I'm going to do is go around and I'll land it at a different speed so you can see the difference. So I'm going to cut my throttle all the way pulled back. I've got my propeller all the way forward. I've got my flaps all the way set. I've got my landing gear down. And this is a point where I could glide this plane all the way down to the ground. Now notice we're still too high. Notice we're still too fast. Everything's completely at zero. By the way, in case you're curious, we're not in the no zone. I'm doing everything fine. This aircraft is just coasting. It's just coasting. I have not lost a single knot of speed, and my altitude situation has not improved in the slightest. So now watch what happens here. Over the runway. And I can't hold the nose up well. I have losing a little bit of authority, but notice how much runway I'm sucking down here. There goes the 2,000 footers. Oh boy, oh boy. Still not on the ground. There it is, and now we're on the ground. Notice that extra 5 knots of speed translated to about a 3,000 foot landing. So just because the aircraft did come down softly, again, it doesn't look like it's the end of the world or anything like that, but you can see immediately how difficult this aircraft was to safely put it down on the ground. So now what I'm going to do is pause, reset everything, and come in at the right speed. All right. So what we've done is we've reset the scenario. We've gotten ourselves all lined up at the runway. We've given ourselves a slightly longer approach here, and we've also kind of set ourselves up so we're at a much, much better angle relative to the runway here. So I'm doing about 70 knots, so we're looking for about 71 as our approach speed here. And like you can probably hear by the engine, it's not going to take much. One of the things that makes this aircraft a little extra tricky to land as well, and we're getting a little slow, I'm just going to let the nose come down just a tiny bit, is the fact that when you do go ahead and reduce that throttle so you can kind of make that nice little roll out and flare, is you're going to be running into a problem where you're going to run out of elevator authority because there's not going to be as much airflow flowing over the engine. There we go. Now we're in good shape. Let's do our Gumpels checks one last time. Cast indicator checks for roll flaps, light speed. Looks good. Looks pretty good. A little high, but that's all right. Of course, those lights don't exist there at the real Wyndham 27, and also the rear runway 27 or Wyndham's a little rough shape. 70 knots, right on altitude. Vertical speed looks good. We're just going to keep gliding down now. I'm going to smoothly start reducing throttle. And we're going to transition. Now, this is tricky because you're going to end up having to pull back a lot harder than you expect. So we're going to transition over the ground here, nose up. If you feel your nose start to sink just a little bit, add just a couple RPM. And we're just going to transition nice and gently onto the ground like that. So you can see we saved ourselves about 1,500 feet of landing just by coming in at the appropriate position. Now, if you're landing somewhere like Wyndham, that could be an extremely, extremely sketchy experience because by the time you've touched the ground, you are now in the trees. So be very, very mindful of this aircraft. It's possible to come in a little extra slow, but again, if you come in a little extra slow, you're going to find that lack of elevator authority makes it really, really sketchy when you're approaching, at least in the flight simulator itself. So what we're going to do now is we're now going to make our way over to the little parking zone, and we'll kind of walk you through the securing and shutdown checklists. Afterwards, our next video will be dealing with some of the emergencies you might face in this aircraft. Preferably, you won't face them in this aircraft, but in the event that you do, you'll have kind of a general idea of sort of what we're looking for, sort of where some of the controls are, and again, we're completely limited by the flight simulator itself as to what we can actually demonstrate to you. So as usual, we're just going to be careful coming around. We don't want to be scraping any wings or anything like that. Good old-fashioned taxiway alpha. Oh man, have I been on this taxiway a few times. Both simulated as well as in the real world. And we're going to find ourselves a nice comfortable parking spot. This I can worry about it too much. Coming around here. Very nice. A little slashing around the tanks there. Apparently there is a pack of Italian aircraft that have decided to join us here. I think that's the P-180. I forget which one that is. It seems very unlikely they'd show up at a convention at Wyndham Airport, but, you know, I'm not one to judge. All right, nice and easy. Didn't take much. And somebody took my parking spot. Jerk. Hop outside, see if we can find a nice, comfortable place to actually go ahead and park. That looks pretty good there, between those two airplanes. And give it a quick tap of the brakes. And we're going to come around real slowly and carefully. Whoa! Looks like we're going to get underneath the wing on that guy. Sorry. I love how you can pivot on that front wheel. It's just kind of fun. All right. Can we do this without smacking into either plane? Please do not park the aircraft in this fashion. And that's good enough. Sweet. All right, shutdown. So what we're going to do is we're going to set the RPM to about idle. That's about 1,000 RPM. That looks pretty good to me. We're also going to go ahead and make sure the cow flaps are in the open position. Pop them out. Looks good to me. We're going to go ahead and make sure that we have the radio master switch in the off position. Click. So we're not going to worry about that too much. Obviously, we have electrical equipment too. We have the elevator trim that's going to want to come off. We're going to take this one and we're just going to slowly pull it back, and the engine's going to go. It's just going to just like that. It's going to go ahead and cut out on us, which is exactly what we want to do. So once the propeller stops, then we shut this off. We don't want to surprise anybody with that. We're going to make sure the parking brake is set. Obviously, this is a short term, but that's okay. I'm not worried about it too much. We're going to make sure the trim is set to the takeoff position. This is just a nice little thing for the guy before us. You can see just how much trim this requires. Trim. Got it. There it is. Beautiful. So we're going to set that trim. Now we're going to make sure the flaps are retracted, which I did already. We're going to shut our master switch to the off position, so they're all set. We're going to make sure our control wheel lock is all set. We're going to make sure the oxygen system, which we don't have. Don't forget to get rid of all the gum that you stuck in here. That's important. Securing the aircraft, super simple. We're going to go ahead and set the parking brake. We're going to go ahead and make sure all the electrical equipment is off. We don't want to be that guy that leaves something on and now, causes the battery to die. I'm sure you can imagine exactly what that will lead to. Master switch is off. Make sure control is idle cut off. Parking brake, we can set that once we put the wheel chocks in. And then after that, we just want to make sure the pilot's wheel is set. We can use the safety belt and kind of wrap it around the yoke a couple times to kind of hold it in the correct position. So that concludes all the normal stuff for this particular aircraft. Things you want to watch out for is the engine itself. You have to make sure you keep a very close eye on the temperatures as well as the RPMs. The aircraft, you have to be almost perfect on speeds. Otherwise, it's going to be very, very unfriendly for you for the landing. If you thought the Archer floated, wait till you try this thing. Other things you want to watch out for in this aircraft is, like I said, we've got that funky ram air lever. We really want to make sure that is closed, except when we're in perfectly clear air and we don't have to worry about any of that. And again, even with that, it only gives you like 1/2 inch of mercury of atmospheric pressure here, so it's not really that much of a benefit. Everything else is very, very straightforward. It's things you're probably comfortable with. Obviously, when you get out of this thing, it's basically impossible to be graceful because of how low these seats are to the floor, but that's okay. Double check your weight and balance, obviously, because this is a very, very small plane. You're not going to be able to carry oodles and oodles of things with 64 gallons of gas, plus especially those auxiliary tanks that you have in there, which makes it an even more ridiculous amount of gas. But other than that, enjoy, and we'll see you from some emergencies later.